We have Peter J. Story, who lives in San Antonio, Texas, with his wife and his 2 pugs. This is a dog reading. Yeah, dog reading. You know, Joanne has her rescue doggies, and Peter has his 2 pugs. I hope you weren't metaphorically referring to children. Okay, he writes code by day and fiction by night, considering himself an author of deliberate, genre-free stories with a soul. While he is not a pen name, he does enjoy chuckling to himself about how well it suits his passion. Things Grak Hates is his debut novel, and it is a lot of fun. I mean, it's a train wreck just waiting to happen. It's just all kinds of disastrous fun. At least that's what I thought when I was reading it. Maybe I was reading the code and not the story. Okay, thanks, Peter.
So, like Joanne, this is my first reading. I hope that if you have any questions, I'll be able to answer them as well as she did, but who knows. All right, so Grak. All right, Grak is a prehistoric nomad. Things Grak Hates is a satirical allegory. It looks at human nature and humanity's inherent lust for power, control, and it does so through the eyes of this self-absorbed prehistoric nomad. Essentially, it's kind of a Pandora's box tale. I don't know, raise your hand if you're familiar with Pandora's box. I figured. So in this case, it starts with olives. So this is a reading from chapter 1. So, actually I should explain this. So the tips that I read about a reading explained that shouldn't read anything that requires too much setup. Unfortunately, all of the really good stuff I wanted to read required tons and tons of setup. I wrote the book in a way where I thought I was really witty, and sentences in some cases, particular word choices, actually reflect back on earlier things from the book. So it's actually quite dense if you know that you're reading something like that. So I ended up having to choose the actual intro, the very beginning of the book, which is actually, from most people's reports, their favorite. So that's coincidental. And do I need anything else here? Get set up? All right, great. So, chapter 1, olives. Grak hates olives. Truly. If there were one point of supreme importance to understand about his habits or character, this would be it. Admittedly, a detail of this sort appears on the surface to be a mere quirk. Thus, one might feel tempted to dismiss it as an insignificant ingredient in Grak's nature. But that would be an erroneous assumption. Only upon closer examination can one discover the trait's true value. Much like a root, it both feeds the man and reveals a profusion of information about his very essence. Perhaps greatest among these insights is the rationale behind Grak's antipathy for the fruit. His chief source of complaint stems from the berry's abundance. As is often the case with things of plenty, olives have become routine, and Grak does not like routine. Though, to be fair, he does appreciate certain routines. If circumstance prevents his evening dip in the hot springs, he gets cranky. This is especially true if that day consisted of hunting or some other equally taxing activity. Grak describes his hot spring dip routine as enjoyable. But some routines only bring grief for Grak. Wetting his toenails falls into this category. And yet he finds the practice as unavoidable as rising from sleep, and nearly as deplorable, which is saying a lot. He would do away with waking if it were possible, but has yet to find a suitable approach. Likewise, as much as he disdains crafting his toenails before the day begins, Grak finds the chore inevitable. And not because it reduces the occurrence of torn nails. While a pleasant benefit, that was never his aim. No, his purpose has always been for the sharpened point itself. By his estimation, it provides a hidden advantage should he find himself in an unfair fight without the upper hand. Needless to say, the tribe does not ask this of him. In fact, when others noticed the habit, they agreed without dissent that they considered it rather queer. But Grak is not keen on sharing the reasoning for his secrets with the camp. He fears that doing so might rob him of that needed edge. Thus, the tribe has no choice but to assume the practice derives from his rather queer nature. And of course, comments such as these only serve to renew his determination and bolster his contempt for the task. Grak describes his toenail wetting routine as regretfully necessary. But olives, now there's another beast altogether. Grak has never liked olives. Even as a boy, he found them awfully bitter and poorly textured. And if that weren't bad enough, they also had a cruel way of leaving his face in an abnormal puckering state. The other children would, of course, make matters worse by calling him names. Puck was their first choice, and perhaps the least derisive. In fact, Grak's longing to be considered good-natured even led him to occasionally admit it carried a ration of humor. But when they began to address him as Tum Tum, that poured a sadness into his being. It whispered, "Your friends are looking down on you. They think you're weak." And Grak considers that to be cruel and unfair, especially since he finds himself faultless in the circumstances surrounding the name's origin. It grew from the handful of incidents where his stomach turned when he spotted the vile berries being served. On the first of these occasions, after a public display of vomiting, Grak became embarrassed. Attempting to redirect blame, he pointed toward a spreading illness as the cause. And much to his surprise, that approach found success, but only at first. By the third occurrence or so, it had been some time since anyone else was unwell and his guise crumbled. The name began soon after. Grak believes this series of events was also responsible for the development of his most hated nickname, Olive. The constant reminder of something so despised was bad enough, but when one mother heard the teasing, she liked the name so much that she bestowed it on her soon-to-be-born daughter. Within a few snows, the moniker became a trend among girls. Though none call him by the name anymore, he still hears it often, and his heart twinges ever so slightly. But even a tragedy like that might have been bearable were it not for the fruit's unrelenting presence. No matter where his people set up camp, olives. Several times he thought he had a run of fortune, but then a foraging party would return days later and suddenly, olives. And not just a few olives turn up, but an overwhelming supply. "Yay, we have so many olives to eat," the tribe declares giddily. But this only drives another pin into Grak's soul. Even when the days turn cold, he finds no relief. Hysteria drives his clan to gather every olive they can find and submerge them in clay jars filled with brine. "We don't want to run out of olives," whimpers the worried bunch. And Grak feels alone in his knowledge that this only makes the things more repulsive. No escape from olives for him. Grak describes the forced olive consumption routine as appalling and abominable, but most often he simply refers to it as depressing. Of course, there's much more to know about Grak than his contempt for olives, such as his love of the color blue, or its connection to his roughly equal feelings of fascination and fear toward the sea, or his guilty pleasure of seeing children scolded, embarrassed, or falling down, though if they're more than mildly hurt, he does feel concern. He's not a monster. Or his love of ponies. Grak does love ponies. Or his hyper-focus on every detail, especially ones he deems unpleasant or disruptive of a few pleasures he does find, like when someone reprimands a pony for biting a child. Or the collection of leaves he keeps stashed away in a leather pouch under his pillow. While they tend to get damaged there, it's the only place he's found that's so secret even Doran won't stumble upon them. Or his best friend Doran, who is the only one to resist calling him anything other than Grak, although the man did privately express a concern for his friend's severe and unusual hatred of olives. Because that's what it always comes back to with Grak, olives. Really, that just sums him right up. More than anything else, by far, he hates them, a lot. But while this period of Grak's life begins with olives, this day's events do not. They start with a chair, a plain, unadorned wooden chair. I actually practiced a much longer one, but then I found it was supposed to be shorter. So that's that one. That's a good place to stop. So that's the book. So a couple things to note. Some people hate it because they hate Grak, because they're expecting to like the main character, and that should be clear from the synopsis and from the intro that is never going to happen. If you do like the character, there might be something wrong with you. I'm not saying that there is. and yet even those people still enjoyed the style. So it depends. But Grak is not someone to like. Grak is a representation of the worst sides of humanity, but it's a very complex story, and the people who love it because of that complexity. And fortunately, there's a lot more people that love it. So anything at all.
Why did you choose to make him unlikable?
Because most books try to write a likable character, and I wanted to write a different kind of book. That's why.
How long did it take you?
About a year.
Did you really have a hard time trying not to make him likable?
Nah, that's easy. No. I took some of my own worst habits. I guess I have some OCD tendencies. I can be kind of a control freak at times. And then I tried to expand on that and make it as bad as it could possibly get in the limited time we had. So, and I think it gets pretty bad.
Does your wife approve of that?
Oh yeah.
Did she give you any other additional items to put in there?
Any other items? Oh, I see. No, my wife has been incredibly supportive. Fortunately, she was my first fan. If she hadn't loved it so much, I don't know if I would have gone ahead, but she did. Some good friends loved it, and not in the way of like, oh, we want to make you happy. So that was supportive.
What's your next book going to be?
I'm not talking about that yet because I want to make sure that I've fleshed out the outline enough, because I am prepared to just drop it if the outline doesn't really work. It looks like we're getting to the point where it looks like the outline is gonna match. It's gonna be a good book. But until then, I'm not saying much, but it's gonna be quite different. So this book is kind of a character-centric psychological satire. So that book is very character-centric psychological as well. It's not going to be humorous at all, I don't think. Maybe something will slip in. It's gonna be, I guess, a bit darker, so that kind of matches, but not darker in the same sense. Some people have been kind of freaked out by Grak. Yeah, or one woman who loved it, coincidentally, said that she was physically ill at times. I personally don't.
Take that as a compliment.
Well, she loved the book. She really liked it. She just said,
Physically touched her.
yeah, it was really one point, which I thought was kind of a humorous part of the story, but I guess it was a bit too dark.
How did you come up with the time period?
Well, what I wanted, so this book has a lot of commentary in it, really, about human nature, about politics. Grak invents politics, by the way, because he hates olives. And so the time period really fit the best for what I wanted the book to be about, because it's kind of like an origin story of evil. Grak and his tribe, his tribe starts off as a very, very pleasant place. Aside from his very self-absorbed nature, he's not such a bad guy. As he says, he's not a monster. So this gave me the ability to kind of build that origin story. So that was the time period. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you guys for coming.
Thank you.